The only econ class I took, I skipped over 100 because I was in like a bong rip qualitative research program and I wanted to do a little stats as a treat. So I took like a Boolean stats course that was in the economics department. It was a really weird cultural thing, and I couldn't tell if my professor hated me because I was queer or trans or I was in like a social justice and human rights program, or if he didn't hate me at all. But like, I definitely got like low key, "What are you doing here, faggot?" kind of vibes from him. It was a strange thing, but I did pretty good in the class. I kind of fucking winged my way to a B.
Yeah, the way that neo-reactionaries are able to turn neoclassical theory into like a social Darwinist theory of everything is, I think, perhaps it's even more so than Romer's like shit that I think it's cool, but I'm a nerd, and I guess I'm trying to learn math so that I can read that stuff, and because one of the arguments that I always hear from fucking neoclassicals and kind of burrows in my head is, oh, you just don't understand. Like, you just can't comprehend it because we're doing such high-level science. And at the end of the day, what they're doing is, it's toy models. They're just toy models, and there's much more impressive work being done in the other sciences. And heterodox economics is a shit show too. I don't want to be too flattery about it, but there's all kinds of like much more sophisticated mathematics going on there. There's a really interesting way that this field believes that it is creating high math.
Yeah, and it's rubbish. If you want to talk about the type of maths that like should be used in economics is the stuff that Beer did with like the Jay Forrester's approach for like Checo in CyberSyn, dynamical systems. That's what econ should be made of. It's a dynamical system. That's how it should be modeled. All of the stuff that's in neoclassical economics should just be set on fire and put in the bin. There's literally nothing to be learned from it, And don't waste your life trying to argue with these twats who won't. When you see them, your arguments are better than those. They won't take them on board because it's not about that. No. It's not about it. There's literally nothing to be learned. Only let somebody else critique it and learn the critiques. There's literally nothing to be learned from these guys.
I just have to say, it's highly sophisticated instrumental reason. You don't see proofs in most ideology.
Well, yeah, what I was
they're not even proofs though.
As a math major, as someone who's got a degree in it, the dirty secret about math, when you apply it to anything but itself, is that you can make math say whatever the fuck you want. Like, the real issue here is where it starts, the fundamental assumptions, the place where all of this is coming from is so batshit that it kind of doesn't matter what you do with the math on top of it. It's all going to come to something really, really fucking dumb.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask Kyle, do you take issue with rights? Because you said something to the effect of like, you don't have a problem with the methods. You have a problem with the fact that the methods are so two-faced. So do you have a problem with Wright's eminent critique of this because the assumptions are so two-faced, or is it just Sorensen that makes you angry?
Yeah, no, I was struggling to try to articulate something intelligent there, and I think I do fundamentally have a problem with the method. I can't get around that, and I think that the problem is what I was saying about being two-faced is even when you are making a point like Wright's, if you're using the neoclassical framework consistently, you are being two-faced because you're saying things without actually saying them. Because, yeah, you're talking about rent without the notion of a rent stream over time, which is what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. And so I was just going to say that I feel like in this Read It group, I'm going to be like Otto Neurath was back in the old Vienna Circle days, where whenever somebody would bring something up, he would just shout metaphysics. And everybody bullied him into replacing that with just shouting M instead of metaphysics because it was less of their time. But yeah, I'll try to I'll try to tone it down.
No, Kyle, keep the rage. Keep the fucking rage. Keep
Yeah,
it.
somebody has to be apoplectic on this show.
I
I don't
have
think it
No,
works.
it's a good
Yeah,
point.
there's a big gap. There's a hole left in my heart.
Oh, please.
What
Let
do you
me just say this though, that what we've been saying about time, and look, I'm adopting this for the sake of argument. I do fundamentally agree that abstracting from time does violence to economies, and there's a whole movement in called evolutionary economics, some of which has been absorbed into the mainstream, but you can't. It would be hard for them to really incorporate dynamics into.
You can have discrete time slices in neoclassical economics, but you cannot have continuous time in even like a way that admits like Zeno's paradox.
So for fundamentally, like in a way, the coolest thing about calculus is missing.
Yeah.
Exactly. So like, it's really not some just left the axe to grind. You can just care about truth value, and if you like, let's say you're just missing the lobe that gives a shit about ideology, and you're only interested in truth value, you can have an axe to grind about this legitimately. It is a bizarre abstraction that not just Marxists with motivated secret theorists, like secret hopes about the labor theory of value, argue. It's just
Yeah, and I think that the point where I find this to be most concerning about economics is that the conception of the economy is a conceptual system that has been used to destroy an enormous amount of life on Earth.
Right.
To justify it as something that we don't need to be concerned about, because there is the in-group that belongs in the economy, and there's the out-group that doesn't matter.
It's the ecology. And it's always bracketed out.
The ecology, yeah, exactly. Whatever
Which often enough includes other humans.
Yes, it's very much like nature in the sense of like also nature of like the people we don't like. They're too bestial to be human. And as long as we stick with a economic framework that does not admit the existence of time, I don't see how we get to some kind of like political ecology that transcends that in-group out-group distinction that is leading to like an ongoing mass extinction event. Because like how can you talk about nature without talking about one of the most fundamental constructs of the physical world? Like, how do you get to materialism? I believe like a true materialism is one that acknowledges
material
time and space in
a material world, and there is nothing ideologically more suited to denying that humans exist in a material world than neoclassical economics and its denial of space and time as things that.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Well, part of it all is that we can thank our Lord and Savior Karl Marx for getting us off the, vulgar ground of Epicurean materialism that takes vulgar interests in the nature of the world, and we know that what materialism really means is social, right? Which is kind of something about old school political economy that does legitimately reflect on Marx's notion of materialism, which is maybe like. So Marx's materialism is cool, but
you have to do a roundabout maneuver to re-include nature in the social in order for the project to be useful in any way, right?
Yeah.
So to circle back to the text, though, I just want to completely understand where you're coming from because, I'm a bimbo and I got to ask questions to understand. Isn't it, if you assume neoclassical for the point of imminent critique and it shows its face, or it shows its ass as two-faced and foolish, isn't that a good thing?
So there's the way in which you can arrange a toy model, like Esri described, in order to show a contradiction with what neoclassicals make as like normative claims, or even as sort of quote unquote scientific claims, which are like sort of semi-normative. They have the normative value of being scientific. And that's kind of like what Romer was trying to do, right? Was to like, do the immanent critique. But the problem with doing the immanent critique is you still have to accept as valid the fundamental assumptions of the model for it to be immanent. Right? And that's where I'm taking issue with.
Yeah, no, but I think what you're saying about immanent critique makes sense, because I think what you're supposed to do in immanent critique, and this is what makes Marx such a, God bless him, but a poor role model in this respect, is immanent critique is for the purpose of drawing out a contradiction, is supposed to demolish the framework in which you're working in. Marx is ironically the figure that people most use to reintroduce classical political economy into discussion. The framework he at first was, I think, trying to demolish, but he later got more scientific aspirations.
Yes, and I just personally believe that there are not the tools in an immanent critique of neoclassical economics to perform that demolishing work, because you're starting with no space and time, and that's a big problem.
But if I hear you clearly, because of an initial split between economics and ecology, perhaps one could say that an immanent critique of economics by itself can't.
Yes,
it's what we need. Economics, period, as a field, because we still have to buy into the split somehow.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So
I can agree with that, because
it's like, you can use the master's tools, but like sometimes the master's tools are just like a suicide booth, and that's what are you going to do with that, right?
I guess the reason why I kept asking this is I'm walking away from this immanent critique being like, this shit sucks. Like, fuck neoclassical. It's not like I'm walking away with this being like, well, space and time doesn't really matter. I'm walking away from this being like, this is some of the biggest horseshit I've ever seen. So that's why I kept asking. But I think I do understand that, like, in no way is assuming neoclassical economics going to deal with fucking climate change or issues of the appropriation of Native American lands. Like, it just can't.
It can't, and it can't deal with things like the ways that finance can exploit people over time, because you can't, you can't really learn anything about finance from the system that's super useful, because in the system, the payoff schedule is perfectly predictable. So that doesn't really tell us anything about the antagonism between lender and debtor.
And finance people have thermodynamic models, which apparently also suck, as it turns out, but whatever.
What are you talking about? This sounds dank. I could just, borrow money and it's going to be fine no matter what. Like, sign me the fuck up.
Yeah, well...
Yeah, I mean, if we just defined our way, all the problems with lending money, it would be
but
great.
yeah, where's that bank? Sign me up for the neoclassical banks to give me a loan. Let's fucking
Excuse
do
me,
this.
I need to speak to your bank manager. I have a proof here that demonstrates this economy that I've
Excuse me, time is not real, so I am technically not late.
Yeah, this is the economics version of the film Pi, I believe.
Are you calling my information imperfect? Fuck you. Okay, let's get back on track. Can we get back on track to this slide?
Yeah.
No track. Only
no
time.
track. Only trek. Okay, who wants to do this one?
All right, my turn. Class, exploitation, and perfect competition and information. What about the third criterion, the appropriation principle? Do capitalists appropriate the labor effort of workers in a capitalist system with perfect competition and information? In such a system, in equilibrium, workers who expend more effort would be paid more, workers who shirked would be paid less, and according to standard marginalist reason, the amount they were paid for their effort would exactly reflect the price of the product they produced with that effort. The standard reasoning of neoclassical economics to deny the existence of exploitation in capitalism. Even under the above conditions, the following is true. 1. The only labor performed is by workers. 2. Capitalists appropriate that product and thus appropriate the fruits of labor effort of workers. 3. For any given wage level, capitalists have an interest in getting workers to expend more labor effort than workers would spontaneously want to expend. 4. If workers owned their means of production, capitalists would find it difficult to get workers to work as hard for a given level of wages. In a purely competitive capitalist economy, therefore, antagonistic interests over the expenditure and appropriation of labor effort continue to exist. Therefore, rents do not capture all the aspects of exploitation.
Who could have thunk?
I mean, this is a good book to give to baby econ students. Be like, read this, my poor child.
Read just like literally 10 pages and come back to me.
Yeah.
Just we've talked about it, but like, you know, it is just I find personally, because I haven't read the actual neoclassical econ, but when you read these arguments, they are so nonsensical, like, and so riddled with holes that I feel like my brain isn't structured right to receive these arguments. Like, I cannot understand in what kind of way you could look at the structure that had been set up here for this, where you have workers and not workers, and try to make out that they're like, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm saying. It's just like, basically, the last sentence is all we need to get from this, is that rents do not capture all the aspects of exploitation. Okay.
Well, this is why right libertarians are so into weed. They have to just like fucking smoke fat dubs, like huge fat dubs on a daily basis in order to get this to absorb into the brain and stick.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't think that's any excuse. Someone who smokes fat dubs on a regular basis, I still think you have intellectual and moral autonomy from.
To be clear, I'm not saying dubs necessarily is necessary and sufficient. It's just necessary.
Are we saying marijuana is reactionary? Is this what we've come to?
Yes, I am straight edge Sophie Maoist, and if you smoke dubs and have sex and do anything fun, you're a counter-revolutionary.
And that's it. Joining the White Army.
Okay, right. I'm going to take on this next section. Employment rents. In Sorensen's analysis, the employment rents workers receive because of transaction costs in the employment relation counts as a form of exploitation, rendering the workers an exploiting class. That's right, the workers are exploiting. Here, Wright argues that in general, employment rents constitute one of the way workers are able to mitigate their own exploitation. Now, this is like this part of the book really annoyed me, I must say, because one of the best things for me, like for reading so far in the book, the way Wright talks, is that he brings this kind of analytical, philosophical approach to trying to very precisely define terms and stuff like this. Yet here we have him taking on board even the concept of an employment rent. I mean, this is outrageous. As a Marxist, that he could even use that term without it being like in sarcastic, that he can actually, like, you should never use a term like employment rent. Like, it's not a rent. You know what I mean? As a Marxist, it just infuriates me how, like, he takes on board this neoclassical term and doesn't critique it. And he just takes it as a given. It just drives me absolutely mental. For someone who's being very precise to then switch into this kind of imprecision, for me, is just, I kind of find it outrageous.
To be clear, you're objecting to him taking on the definition of rents, right? Like,
of employment rents.
Employment rents, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and he doesn't like he doesn't critique it, as far as I can remember, but he takes it, he deals with that as a type of a phenomenon in capitalism. I'm going to continue. Like, if I take that back if I'm wrong, but that yesterday or whenever I reread it, the same thing hit me again. Okay. First point, where imperfect information exists, capitalists are generally prepared to pay employment rents to workers in order to extract labor effort from them. This has been elaborated by Bowles and Gintis and Akerlof and Yellen, who is the current Fed chair. Because of imperfect information in the labor market and process, capitalists are forced to spend resources on enforcing the labour contract through supervision, monitoring, etc., in order to detect shirking. 3. Catching workers shirking is only useful for capitalists if workers care about being punished, especially about losing their jobs. The threat of being fired increases as the cost of job losses to workers increases. Paying workers an employment rent, a wage above their reservation wage, increase the cost of job loss and thus the potency of employer threats. So, if I've got a job now and the work, normally I would only get paid £8 an hour for it, and getting paid £10 an hour for it, well, I care more about getting fired then, so I will not shirk as much. And it'll be a cost to me if I have to go into the job market again to get an £8 an hour wage. Next, the cost to employers of extracting labour effort thus consists of 2 components: the cost of catching working shirking, monitoring costs, and 2, the cost of making job loss hurt. That's an unemployment rent. The employment rent is thus a wage premium that workers are able to get because of their ability to resist capitalist attempts at extracting labour effort. In conditions of perfect, i.e. free to acquire information, the capitalist capacity to appropriate effort is enhanced since workers lose this ability to resist. Rather than seeing employment rents as a form of exploitation by workers, it is more appropriate to see such rents as the outcome of resistance to exploitation by workers. Right, so he nearly gets there, but he still uses the term employment rents, and I just find that just gross. Yeah.
Well, isn't he just outlining Sorensen's argument here? That's kind of how I took it.
I think he's trying to provide an alternate, pro-labor, account of employment rents and who's doing the exploiting.
This is later on, yeah.
And so this is, it kind of unfolds from his definition of exploitation when taking the neoclassical model into account.
The definition of exploitation is different from Sorensen. Therefore, he's making a very slightly different point to him. Okay, so Wright's definition of exploitation is slightly different from Sorensen's, right? So when Sorensen says that actually exploitation is good, Wright is saying the same thing, but from a very slightly different assumption at the beginning that gives it a little bit more pro-worker flavor.
Well, I don't think Wright is putting the moral spin that it's good per se, but he's taking on the definition of employment rents, but changing his definition of exploitation.
Yeah, because Wright doesn't think that unemployed workers are exploited by solidarity wages.
Yes, this only applies to the case in Sorensen. The similarity is the case in Sorensen where workers who are making above the reservation wage are exploiters. They agree that there is a rent collected in both of those cases, but they disagree about other things.
Right. And to answer a question from the chat, how does this constitute a rent? I believe that rent in this section and in this framework is basically just any amount of value that you can get from some kind of asset above and beyond the value that you would get from it in a situation of perfect competition.
So I guess, I don't know, I don't take as much issue because this is, to me, this is just a thought experiment, right? Let's assume Sorensen's bullshit and you still end up with class antagonism. I don't really see the problem there.
I don't know. I think I think this explanation for employment rents isn't. This doesn't squick me out as much. And the neoclassical framework of rents, I think, is one of these real abstraction things that mirrors something that happened in the economy, where once the concept of rent, is from what I understand, is all tied up in land. That's what all the old school political economy is about.
It's about positionality. It's about positionality, exactly. It's you have a position that allows you to get an economic advantage. And
Right.
there's sort of a mental leap that's taken from land rent to like having a social position that allows you to get an economic advantage.
Having an asset
Right.
specifically,
But-
like having the means of production that you rent, basically.
Okay,
Not necessarily
so-
means of production,
no,
like a house
but
as
we're
well.
talk-
Remember,
but
It's-
we're
Right.
We're
Employment rent.
We're talking. So at first, rent is like landed property in political economy. From what I understand, intellectual property rents are one of the earlier abstractions from this concept of renting a literal place to, oh, I invented this idea and this is my idea, or this is my like thing, and if you use it or play it in a certain context or whatever, because I'm renting this place of abstract space, I get a cut, right? So there's already in the process of capitalism quite early on an abstraction into the abstract plane with rents. And so the way that I see the neoclassical expansion of the term rents to cover all kinds of differentials is mirrored in the way that capitalism actually does expand markets that are kind of like that. Sometimes people call it neo-feudalism or techno-feudalism or whatever, or content markets, and like more things resemble intellectual property markets, resemble rentier markets. So I don't think just returning to a purely classical definition of rents is going to help us understand the 21st century economy, because there's been a real like procession of abstraction that's happened over the course of time in capitalism. And, we do want a more like maybe precise definition of rents, but I like this argument that Wright makes at the end, I don't take to be totally an imminent critique. I do think.
Well, he circles around at the end of the chapter and says, so basically, in conclusion, Sorensen's whole thing about rent is silly, and this is a whole different kind of relationship. It's wage exploitation.
Right, but
so it's not like he's
not. Yeah, he's not endorsing this concept of exploitation, but I think he would agree with Sorensen, and this is making Tom upset, right? That this is that employment rent exists.
Yeah,
and,
I get
and
that.
You can think of that as a rent.
Yeah,
and there are ways that workers are divided in the economy by wage differentials, and sometimes people think of those things as rents. And when you think about trade and labor and between the first and third world, let's say, there's distributional differentials, and sometimes people call those things rents. There's like a number of like usages this way that I don't know. I don't find that as intrinsically objectionable.
He is saying that the possession of labor power by a worker allows them to become a rentier.
Why am I getting a math degree? Right? Is because I kind of want skill rents above what I can make now.
That's not a rent.
No, it doesn't have any necessary relationship to accreditation. It's the employment rent.
Not necessarily.
The employment rent is any kind of positional advantage, but yes, if you were to reduce it down to the question of labor power, then yeah, like it would be skilled labor would give you a rent that you could collect.
Well, it's not rent. Like it's not a rent. Like you get.
I don't think that it's necessary that I don't think this necessitates an anti-labor perspective or an anti-communist or anti-Marxist or anti-worker perspective.
But let's get it straight, right? Marx breaks down the economy into two different types of skilled and simple labor, right? So skilled labor produces value at a higher rate. Okay, so if you are skilled labor, according to Marx, right, you will be getting, the fact you're getting a higher wage is because you're creating more value, depending on, obviously depending on what your role is, whether it's value creating or not. So like you're not getting a rent, you're getting exploited still, but you're creating more value. The idea that is a rent is just, it's like the use of a wrong concept, Like, so if a worker is able to extract more like money here that he calls them like some kind of an employment rent, what that means is that in that relationship that the worker has more power and he's got more labor power, his value of his commodity is higher. There's no rent involved here. Now, if you were working as a skilled laborer, say, for a company and you're getting above the value of which you're producing, at that point you can call it a rent, I think. But you can't call it before that. Okay. And like skilled labor are not generally, maybe in the exception, they can get a rent. But in general, they're getting exploited, but they're creating more value.
Yep. Agreed.
Yes. Certainly by like labor theory of value standards.
Correct. And like, but what I find frustrating here is that like I feel reading this now, maybe Wright will say somewhere else in another book, but I get the impression that he thinks employment rents, the way that we're talking about them here, is a reasonable, is a scientific, accurate description of that phenomenon. And as a Marxist, I just don't know, like that's just like if you're going that way, I don't know how you can critique somebody from getting rid of exploitation, because you're basically just calling differences in labor, in power relations between people, a rent, and that is not a rent, And I just find that offensive that a Marxist could call that an employment rent and take it on its terms.
There is a version of labor theory of value that doesn't accept the idea of like a multiplier effect for skilled labor, and in that one, sometimes people use rents to describe the difference.
Fair enough.
Yes, it would necessarily follow if you didn't accept that skilled labor is more value productive, then you would have to conceptualize it as a rent. There's no other way to really think about it.
Well, why couldn't you, like, why can't you, with the sloppy fucking stuff that we're dealing with here today, why couldn't you conceptualize it as an exploitation? That's the fucking shit that's going on here. We're mistaking
that's way worse.
Rent and exploitation.
It's way worse. And that's why this chapter is interesting. Is because however aberrant you find Wright's position.
So okay, here's my thing. I don't know dick from shit, right? Like, I don't know whether I fully buy on to the labor theory of value or not. Everyone could take their crack at trying to convert me to the religion. I'm down, but my vibe check with this, right, is that I think rents, just knowing what little I know, I think rents make a lot of sense to describe intellectual property, definitely land. I don't know if I necessarily agree that skilled labor is like you're renting out the asset of your education for rent. If that's the implied thing that's here or not.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about like what Wright is saying a little bit more directly, we could just read the last, the concluding paragraph of the chapter.
Good idea.
Yeah.
No. Let's keep speculating.
Here, I think it might be there in this slide here. Have a look.
So, in some cases, rents might still be directly a form of exploitation. The rents that a landowner charges a tenant farmer constitute a direct appropriation of the labor value of the farmer, for example. In other cases, rent acquisition is better thought of as a way of mitigating exploitation. It is for this reason that, in general, I have argued that employees who are the recipients of various forms of rents within their earnings should be regarded as occupying a, quote, privileged appropriation locations within exploitation relations, unquote. The concept of economic rent, therefore, can play a useful role in the theory of class and exploitation by clarifying the range of mechanisms by which exploitation is enhanced or counteracted, but not by reducing the concept of exploitation simply to advantages obtained by asset owners under conditions of imperfect competition and imperfect information.
Right. So he completely buys into the idea of employment rents as a
exactly.
As a
yes.
Yeah, it's offensive as a Marxist how you could come to that conclusion. Like, you can have problems with the labor theory of value, say, Wright is coming out of that thing, that the problems that like the TSSI I think deals with conclusively. And I can take, yeah, okay, so you want to redesign your labor theory, or you want to redesign the theory of exploitation, blah blah blah, but he still takes on board this offensive for a Marxist description, which he doesn't have to like take on board the idea of like somebody being able to get a little bit better pay, being exploited a little bit less as actually getting a rent. That seems to me to be a complete
contradiction in terms or something.
Not contradiction in terms, but like a concession to neoclassical. It's like he takes on all the concepts from neoclassical economics to call that thing a rent for me.
There is an issue, I think, which is that in Capital, Marx says that the determination of the wage rate is something based on social conflict, right? Like it's based on the conflict of the workers and the capitalists. This
power
is
relation,
it's a power relation. So when we describe that wage rate going up or down, like what is the precise term that we can use to describe like the stakes of that antagonism?
It's the value of the labor power. That's what it is. It's the value of the labor power.
Does Kleiman accept the? Sorry, I was just putting together like some old debate that Andrew Kleiman was talking about. Like, does the TSSI accept the multiplier effect? Because I remember him arguing for a form of homogeneous labor.
No, he does. Yeah, completely. Like,
all right,
I have asked him explicitly in an interview only a couple of years ago about that.
All I know is that because I'm part of, if I were to join an industrial union for healthcare, I'd basically be going into the hospital, karate chopping a nurse, and stealing her purse.
Hell yeah, babe.
The only way that I could see this being as making any kind of sense is if you're talking about like licensure, for example. Like if you're an architectural drafter, you don't actually tend to make that much because you are tied to your ability to work is by and large tied to your ability to put a stamp on your drawings that are accepted by the state. So if you don't have that, you essentially need to be working for someone who does, and that person is going to be taking a cut of your essentially the money that you're making for the business, right? That's how businesses operate. If you have your own license, if you can actually stamp documents yourself, even if you are working for someone else, what you get paid increases significantly, right? So in that kind of instance, is that licensed ability to stamp a legal document therefore an asset that can be charged rent upon above and beyond what you would normally get?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it would alter the distribution of returns to labor through rents. Yes.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I'd have to check. I'd have to think about that one.
I think
accreditation. I'm not exactly sure about accreditation, Kyle, because like, are you just changing the amount of exploitation that you're undergone by your accreditation?
Yeah, but the point of accreditation is it's like a form of social closure, making the labor pool smaller. Yes. Like that's like the whole fucking point. There's some problems with the way that what you might call labor aristocracy, or even like the sort of nationalist focus that classical labor movements had, that would create these dynamics that, look, I'm a pluralist. I know that people aren't all going to have the same frameworks. And so you can describe these dynamics in a way using these like extended concepts of rents. Maybe once the dust is settled, I'll feel much more strongly about this, and I'll, want a nice ortho way of understanding rents. But, where I'm at now, like, and I think in general for analysis, we can make our case, but it's one thing to say that like one analysis is like superior than the other, and I guess it's another thing to say that like the concessions of these premises of rent, constitutes a fundamental betrayal of the working class, let's say.
I don't know if I feel like it's a expensive. Like, I feel like maybe it might be wrong, but
yes, but why is it like the thing is? Look, like why do all the errors go one way, right? Why do the interpretations all line stack up in one way? That's the problem. It's not like if somebody has an imperfection that Wright's taking upon board the idea that they are employment rents to me, that somebody has a better bargaining position to reduce their amount of exploitation is a rent, says something to me fundamental about his politics. Vicky, will you take this last slide or this second last slide?
Okay, so what about skilled workers? So Wright claims that it is certainly the case that in conditions of solidarity wages, the wages of skilled workers are lower than they would be in the absence of union-generated reductions of wage differentials. He gives two reasons why the unskilled do not exploit the skilled in this context. Solidarity wages enhance overall class solidarity and thus shifts the balance in favor of the workers. In the long run, this advantages the material interests of skilled and unskilled workers. And two, in the absence of solidarity wages, skilled workers would receive union-generated rents. Then what the solidarity wage really does is simply reduce the rents acquired by skilled workers and redistribute them to the unskilled workers. Even if you regard rents per se as a form of exploitation, this does not constitute a form of exploitation of skilled workers by the unskilled, but of the economic agents who pay the rents to the skilled workers in the first place. If we see solidarity wages as a redistribution of rents from the skilled to the unskilled, perhaps the unskilled are exploiting the capitalists, since after all the capitalists are paying the wages and thus the rents. But capitalists, under the definition of exploitation being used here, are themselves exploiters of workers by virtue of appropriating the fruits of labor of the workers. The rent component of solidarity wages should therefore in general be thought of as a mitigation of capitalist exploitation rather than a form of exploitation in its own right.
Right, and much of Tom's, and I think understandably so, much of Tom's attitude towards calling something like this a rent is because of the association of, rent as a form of exploitation. So in the same way that exploitation and non-exploitative economic oppression can have this moralized discourse around it, we can have a moralized discourse around rents that is informed by this kind of feeling that rents are always tantamount to exploitation. But this is explicitly not Wright's view. He sees this form of rent as a mitigation of the exploitation of worker by capitalist. That essential labor appropriation principle, I think, defends him from a lot of nonsense that could otherwise come about by assuming these principles.
Right, but he takes them on their own terms. That's my problem. He takes their concept of an employment rent and runs with it. He thinks, employment rents are good, and I object to that concept.
Convince me that this is a worse analysis, because I don't care if he takes them on their own terms or not. What better explains the reality? I think I kind of disagree with this, honestly, but I don't have this knee-jerk kind of hatred that I feel from other people. Does it explain the real world well or not is really what I care about at the end of the day.
But I think the terms matter. It matters whether that it is in a rent or whether it's just literally the worker has got more power and they're able to not be exploited. So you end up with language where you start describing workers as having doing the same shit as capitalists are doing in a relationship where they're goddamn being exploited.
That's explicitly not what Wright is saying.
No.
So again, the terms matter if one term better explains the real world or not. So I don't feel like you really answered my question.
No, what do you mean? Wright is calling these employment rents. Right.
Yes.
He is calling it employment rents, but
Okay.
he's not saying that they're doing the same thing that the capitalists are doing. They're mitigating.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, he's calling them employment rents. That's my point. And so he's even why he says it's not the same.
So what?
He's bringing in
analytical
this
objection.
term.
He's
absolutely.
He's
Absolutely.
He's not
And it's
drawing
more
an
than-
equivalence with capitalists. He's drawing an equivalence with rentiers of like landlords and shit, right? Like that's it. But he's saying capitalists are doing a separate thing when they're exploiting workers.
Yeah, and I would say further, I agree with you, Esri. It is an analytical decision, but also it's more than just that. To me, it's a political decision.
Well, no, I said this is an analytical objection. Like,
Yes, I mean,
which
objection.
is fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yes, but I think it's more like I'm having an analytic objection, but I'm also having a political objection.
But
Yeah, it's both.
I guess okay, but like, so your problem with it is simply that it conflates what workers and landlords.
Correct.
Is that the essence of your objection?
Yes, absolutely.
But I mean, look,
As if the worker in a position who's been exploited is actually somehow exploiting the capitalist.
But that's not what
it
that's.
is.
Well, no, he does say that actually. Well, he does say that you, if anything, you can think of unskilled workers as exploiting the capitalists.
It's like,
I don't think he actually does say that specifically.
yeah,
He says something like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably because he wouldn't co-sign that someone that's not appropriating labor effort is an exploiter.
I think what he's saying is that even if you take on that rent is necessarily exploitative, then if you're going to call what the unskilled worker is getting above and beyond what they quote unquote should be getting, then you can't really call that an exploitation of the skilled worker. It's more an exploitation of the capitalist, of the person who owns the assets. And therefore, like if you're exploiting the exploiter, in a sense, that kind of cancels out. Like that's kind of the argument that I'm reading here.
But you're not
he's
exploiting them.
saying that the greater evil here is exploitation, what the capitalists do. And if you subscribe to that like extreme, like all rents are exploitative view, then yeah, the rents that the unskilled workers are taking may exist, but they're taking them within the context of a larger exploitation, a larger injustice. Right?
No.
Let me just read it real quick. I found it. Let me just read it real quick.
No, let me just say one thing in response to Kyle there. Like, you are taking neoclassical economics on board if you are taking the position that the worker, they're able to get a higher wage than what is like in whatever that reference, whatever market rate or whatever that's implied under perfect conditions or whatever, that anything above that is a rent. Like we're taking neoclassical definitions of what are rents on board if we're going to say that.
Yeah. No, I
object to that fucking fundamentally.
No. I know. I was just trying to describe what his argument was.
Yeah, Kyle's in a darkness. Let's just read this. Let's just read this. If solidarity wages are viewed simply as redistribution of rents from skilled to the unskilled, perhaps the unskilled are exploiting the capitalists, since, after all, capitalists are paying the wages and thus the rents. But capitalists, under definition of exploitation being used here, are themselves exploiters of workers by virtue of appropriating the fruits of labor of workers. So what I'm reading that as, and again, I'm not necessarily endorsing that, but what I'm reading that as is that this is sort of a form of counter-exploitation to exploit the exploiters, right? And they're not exploiting maybe to the same extent that they're being exploited, but it's a way to get a little bit more, right? Now, here's my thing, right? I give two rats' asses whether these concepts come from neoclassical or wherever they come from. What I want to know is, like, does this explain things better? And what I'm hearing a lot of objections to is it just comes from neoclassical, so therefore it's bad. And for me, and again, I already kind of don't necessarily agree with all of this, But for me, I'm going to need something a little bit better than neoclassical bad. Like,
That's
you don't
not-
need to convince me of that.
That's not even what I'm. That's not what I'm like. God Almighty! Like when a worker is in relation to a capitalist and they work for a wage for them, the rate of exploitation, varies within that. Okay, now the fact that a worker can reduce the amount of exploitation is not. They're not exploiting the capitalist. They're reducing the rate of their own exploitation, right? There's not a rent going on there. There's a reduction in their exploitation due to the value of their labor power is higher. Okay. And like to somehow bring the language in and and confuse the relations of production and confuse the analysis to call that a rent is just look. If you don't understand my point, I can't convince you anymore because
No. The first half of your point actually does get at what I was hoping to get from you is like, give me something that explains this better. That's all I'm asking, right? Like, and I think based on my limited understanding, I think you did that. So thank you. It's this, it's everything after the first half of just like, I don't know if I necessarily agree that it confuses the relationship here. I just want something that explains what happens to me when I'm at fucking work.
Yeah, maybe we can put it this way: is that theoretically speaking, in order to look at wage differentials, I guess there's two kinds of ways to look at those things as rents. One of them doesn't have a labor theory of value. The other kind of does have a labor theory of value. It's just that it doesn't accept that skilled labor has some kind of multiplier effect. In order to conceive of these, differentiated sectors of the working class without rents, you need a labor theory of value, or at least it's sufficient to have, if not necessary. But I can't think of an alternative. You need a labor theory of value with that multiplier effect reading of skilled labor. So, that's one version of the labor theory of value. But I think every other theory, if I'm not mistaken, and I think Kyle, Tom, you'd probably be able to check me better on this. Maybe there's some like heterodox theories or historical theories that are alternatives, but most people conceive of these differentials as rents. Outside of that specific reading of labor theory of value with the multiplier effect on skilled labor.
Well, like that's the standard.
Just to make sure that I'm keeping up with the conversation here, and just to make sure that the audience is too, because Sophie's horning in on my position as the dumb bimbo in this podcast, and I don't like it.
You've both been on Twitter. That's so cute.
I've been on Twitter less.
So I think like what's happening here is that what Wright is saying with his argument of this kind of like counter exploitation is kind of paralleled by what you're saying in the way in which having a higher skill or being in a union, whatever, these are forms of taking away some of the value that the capitalist is capturing as a form of exploitation, right? And what Wright is saying here is that even if you consider it a form of exploitation, because it is not exceeding the exploitation that the capitalists are doing in the first place, and almost definitionally can't, then like that doesn't really matter. But I think what your point is, Tom, is that even calling it exploitation and saying it doesn't matter kind of misses the point, because you're using a definition of exploitation and sort of like granting it legitimacy over an area in which you fundamentally disagree that it should be at. Like, it's not necessarily like the consequences of, like the direct consequences of his argument that you're opposing here. It is the application of a term and of a definition that is kind of like fundamentally broken in a way. Like, am I getting all this correct?
Yeah, I think so. Like he's using the wrong, like you're using the term of a rent here, when to me, like it's not a rent. It's fundamentally not a rent. It's a power relation within exploitation relations.
Yeah, okay. I will add one thing here, and then I think I gotta get going. Okay, so if you want to take this rentier perspective, there is in the background the neoclassical notion of perfect competition and the returns that implies to labor, right? Like as a yardstick that you use to measure, like, is someone renting or not, or is someone getting rents or not? But if you're coming at this from like Marx's point of view as like sort of this weirdo heterodox classical political economy guy, you don't have that notion of perfect competition. And so there is no such yardstick. Like, these are floating values in a turbulent system. They're not things that you measure above or below a certain line that is defined as perfect competition. And so if you don't have that yardstick, that line of perfect competition, then why bother calling this a rent?
I guess my follow-up question is, so it seems like Wright takes on this concept of rent and just modifies it with his definition of exploitation, right? But does he take seriously the concept of perfect competition, or is that just assumed for the sake of this argument?
It's assumed for the sake of the argument, and it's also a thing that is really, it's like,
it's so baked into these neoclassical
admitting the legitimacy of it as a thing that could even potentially exist sort of colors your argument inherently, because you conceive of this like baseline existing where the other side wouldn't even admit that it exists. So that's I wouldn't say he's like, die hard, rah perfect competition guy, but he's still falling into the same problem that all heterodox economists who use a neoclassical baseline do, which is admitting that this is like a sort of normative model that exists in the world that we can usefully speak about.
I think because of his, training as a sociologist, and I think elsewhere in the book we might have noted it earlier on. He mentions, the sort of obvious sociological distance between assumptions like perfect competition, and in this chapter he's like, yeah, perfect information. I mean, come on, so I wonder really, because I don't think his heart is in that stuff. His heart isn't. There was a point in which he was more like full-throated in support of Romer's economics, but over time, the whole reason for his sociological definition of exploitation is because of his dissatisfaction with Romer's neoclassical economics version of exploitation.
I commend his definitions of exploitation. I think they're very good, right? But I think there is absolutely no need for him in this chapter, right? For him to term what we're talking about here, what I would consider like positions of power in determining the value of the labor power for the worker, to term them as a rent. Like, he could literally could have said, neoclassicals call these a rent. This is obviously not rent because the exploitation relationship is different than that. But continued in that way. But he on some level, he's taking their arguments and their language as read, which I think is very, very objectionable to me, because it confuses the relationship between the worker and the capitalist. The fact that a worker can ever really exploit, like a capitalist, is like, maybe in the extreme case it could possibly happen in an extreme case, but like, not the way that we're talking about here, what they're actually talking of.
So I guess my follow-up question then is like, is there a way to take the way that Wright uses employee rents and try to like model that or think about it not in the context of perfect competition? And does that map onto reality? is that a good theory for explaining social relations?
Well, like that's what he's doing here essentially, because he doesn't believe in perfect information or perfect competition or anything.
But he doesn't really draw that out in like a non-perfect competition because he's giving a critique of Sorensen, so that's kind of in the background.
You don't actually need to use perfect competition as a quantitative baseline because it's something that inherently cannot exist and cannot be measured. It's just a conceptual framework that he's working in. It's not like you can get a number out of the idea of perfect competition. It's just kind of assumed that, like, oh yeah, like if we just let the market play out, like, you know, somehow we would have this idea of like, well, this is what everybody would get.
What I'm saying is that in this chapter, where all this idea is introduced, those assumptions are still there. And so
yes, because he calls it a rent, and he could call it something else and then use the same quantitative model, and it would be the same quantitative model.
But no, that's not what I'm saying, because he doesn't really take the perfect competition thing seriously. So what I'm saying is that
they all say that.
So what I'm saying is that if he doesn't take the perfect competition thing seriously, but he does take the employee rent thing seriously, then we need to think about, does that make sense in conditions of not perfect competition?
Right, or does it make sense for him to actually take it on board as a term?
No, I don't care about that. I'm caring about the thing I'm saying.
Well, maybe I want to like bring this, like cycle this around towards like the practical implications of this. Personally, I think because one of the biggest political problems with labor and socialism, unions, workers' politics in the 20th century was the ways that labor could be segmented from its, universal interests. Like, how do you go from like the, great humanist, like, Marxist horizons, the bong rip, universal, like class perspective transforming into universal human perspective? How do you get from that to workers of the world unite for a white South Africa? Like, how does one get transformed into the other? Is by all of these like ways of segmenting the proletariat. So I don't know if this is my research program, but devil's advocate argument, right? Let's say that calling that an employment rent is like, fundamentally working class, like this, horrific bourgeois ideology. But that like you could use this concept to describe so much of the labor segmentation that ends up dividing the international proletariat's class interests up, so that we end up with nationalist class compacts, we end up with guild trade unions, we end up with cop union shit. Like we end up with all of the dead ends of like 20th and not to mention a lot of these theorists adopt these versions of rent theory and even versions of rents as exploitation theory to understand what the fuck was happening in the USSR. So I think that even if you have a starting point that is tainted and weird, you can make like practical hay out of it in a way that isn't reactionary.
Right. All I'm saying is like let's test it. Like let's set aside the fucking it's neoclassical. Like if he's wrong, he's wrong. It shouldn't matter. And so I want to see. I want to think about this, not neoclassical using the wrong terms and it obscures the relation. Like,
why not call it a profit?
Does this explain anything?
Why don't we just call it a profit then? Why don't we call it an employment profit? Right?
Because that's not the question being posed here.
Well, no, it's exactly. Why not call it employment profit? Right? It would make no fucking sense to call it employment profit. No more than it does to call it employment rent. It's fucking dumb, right? And if the people are using it as a term, it's just all fucked up.
I don't even know if I agree with this, but
I'm going to call it an employment profit from now on. I'm going to call it employment.
Knock yourself out.
I'm going to call it that worker there. He's earning profit there by working for the capitalist who's making profit off him.
If Eric Olin Wright wasn't already dead, I would kind of like be concerned that Tom might go to Madison, Wisconsin, and hunt his ass down.
Yeah, I am. Seriously.
Tom's gonna go full Uncle Ted on Eric Owen Wright.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
no way. No, I'm not gonna bitch out and fucking send him something in the post. I'm going to do it face to face.
Yeah, again, it's going to be hard.
Give him a little kiss.
It's going to be hard, all things considered. RIP. You know.
Yeah. You do not need to call this concept a rent. That's fucking fundamental to me. You can call it something else. But like, don't call it a rent or a profit. Call it something else. Call it their position of power or whatever. Because it matters. Because it makes out that like it buys into this fucking logic of workers, of denying like the overall relationship that's inherent in there. That somehow like, oh, it's 27% capitalist exploitation, 15% fucking workers exploiting capitalists. Like, give me a fucking break. You know, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial from a Marxist fucking economics point of view. I think I'm just saying the plain, simple orthodoxy. And I'm giving out from a point of a Marxist point of view of how to understand an economy is like that. I object to a fellow Marxist, apparently calls himself a Marxist, using a neoclassical concept without even objecting to the name of it and taking it on board. And we've already like talked about the other parts in the chapters so far about how like they have excised certain elements of what we would think is good about Marx. And here's another example. And and I think all of this is symptomatic of, obviously I haven't even finished the book, but it's symptomatic to me of what I know of his politics and where he ended up from Esri. And all of this is symptomatic, and it just irritates the shit out of me.
The reason I don't blame Eric Owen Wright, and I've explained this before, is that this was a sociologist who did defend the labor theory of value in the paradigm available in public as it was like falling apart, and then just sort of like got convinced out. And, maybe he should have been, reading the right books by the time he's like practicing in the 2000s. He was around for decades. It's like I think he was like head of the American Sociologist Association. There's a lot of reasons to be suspicious of Wright. Like, like he's he's like a preeminent like sociologist.
Right.
I think it's extremely important just from a science, like let's leave like Marx and all that bullshit out of it, right? But it's extremely important from a scientific point of view to describe and the relations, say, no matter what you're doing in science, to get them and the concepts right and to not confuse the concepts, and like that, this stuff, like of calling that a rent, it just like irritates the scientist in me, that it muddles what the actual relationship is. And I find that just like scientifically really offensive. You know what I mean?